Welcome everyone to the Wednesday morning series. We have a special guest, my friend, and he is Jake Porter. So I asked him specifically for this topic, feet on the ground. There's a reason, but I want him to tell you a little bit about himself and why he's here today. So I'm going to shut up. I'm going to mute and turn it over to Jake.
Well, thank you, Tammy, my friend. It is an honor to be here with you, and it was good to hear from you and get to actually see you, catch up a little bit before we got started. To those of you who don't know me, my name is Jake Porter. I'm in the Houston area. I have a practice called Daring Ventures. We specialize in treating sex addiction, porn addiction, chronic infidelity, betrayal trauma. We do some gambling and some stuff like that as well. But I've got an amazing team, and I mostly do intensives with couples, and really my sort of sweet spot is the intersection of like couples work and sex addiction and betrayal trauma. And I've done a lot of research in interpersonal neurobiology and attachment theory and all that kind of stuff. So that's what I geek out to and what we're going to geek out to some today. Yeah. And I'm married to Kristen, and we have Magnolia Jane is our 2-year-old daughter, and she's a handful and a mess. Here's a picture, everybody. There you go, Miss Magnolia Jane, and then we've got another one on the way, coming April. So yeah.
And she picked really, really good parents, and the new baby did too. So good job. So
Yes. And Tammy, just so y'all know, like Tammy was our very first wedding present that arrived was from Tammy. So it was very, very sweet. A little blanket. We still use it today. So yeah. Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and get started if you think. All right. So I'm going to share some slides with you guys. And as I get that going here, let me just say this, that I know, like I readily admit I am a geek, I'm a total nerd, and I'm gonna get kind of wonky on this thing. We're going to get into some really interesting neurobiological stuff about trauma and about grounding and what's going on in the brain when we get triggered and all of that. And if you lose some of it, if it doesn't quite all click in your head, that's okay, because you'll get some of it and hopefully have a little better understanding. And I'm just going to say this, I don't mind being interrupted. So Tammy, if you see questions and you want to interrupt me to answer them, feel free to just speak up. Okay.
I will do that. And please know it's being recorded. So this will be posted on the sexandrelationshiphealing.com site later today. So if you missed something, you can come back and watch the video. So I will
There you
share
go.
that link.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. So feet on the ground. That's what I'm calling this webinar here. And it's about returning to safety after trauma, dissociation, and dysregulation. What we're going to try to do, three things. We're going to try to understand the underlying neurobiological experience of trauma and dissociation and dysregulation. So what's actually going on there when that's happening. We want to better identify the signs that you're experiencing trauma, dissociation, or dysregulation. So how do you know that's happening? And also learn some practical tools for returning to integration and regulation. And actually, Tammy, I thought of one more question. How long are we going?
1 hour.
1 hour. Okay, got it. That way I know how long I can spend off on rabbit trails. Okay, so starting out, just there are a lot of types of trauma out there. There's impersonal trauma. So an impersonal trauma would be like a car accident, or lightning strikes a house and it catches on fire. That could be an impersonal trauma. Versus interpersonal trauma, where it's happening in a relational context with another person. An assault, for example. But there can also be some overlap with these. So, for example, identity trauma. So where you feel the trauma based on your identity. So this would be what happened to, for example, the Jewish people during the Holocaust, or racial trauma, as African Americans are affected by systemic traumas and that sort of thing. And then community or group trauma. I live in Houston, so the example of this that I always, well, obviously I live in Houston, go Astros, World Series champs. So the example for group trauma I always give is like hurricanes, right? So Hurricane Harvey, experienced by a whole community of people. And then complex trauma is where there's ongoing trauma. Usually it's a relational trauma, impersonal trauma that is ongoing and layered. So it happens multiple ways over time, and it creates complex trauma. So a lot of that comes from like childhood, neglect experiences, that sort of thing. So lots of types of trauma out there. Developmental trauma, though, is one that I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand, because we don't remember it. You can't like put your finger on it like a car accident or an assault or whatever. And so it's like, okay, it's not necessarily in our awareness. But what developmental trauma is, it's when infants and children experience prolonged periods of misattunement. When that happens, they develop neural structures in which the features of affect dysregulation, so going into fight, flight, freeze, those sorts of responses, which are meant to be momentary, right? That's meant to happen in a moment of threat. And then you go back to sort of a normal state. When that becomes the normal state, it becomes a maladaptive default state. Now that's the set point. Okay. And that's one of the consequences of developmental trauma. And so what happens is these neural networks in our brain are encoded with maladaptive relational schemas, often called internal working models. That's really wonky. Here's what it means, though. It means that my default template that I'm using as I look at the world and look at relationships and experience relationships, I'm already tipped toward fight or flight or freeze. I'm on edge, you might say. And I'm that way because that's what I experienced. I experienced an environment, and I experienced relationships that sort of programmed me to live in that space. What that basically means, let me see if I can do this. Hopefully y'all can see my pointer on this, is it means that left and right hemispheres are not encoded together. The memory networks on left and right hemispheres aren't coded very well. So, left brain, right brain, a lot of people think that's like, oh, are you creative versus a numbers person or whatever? Throw that out. Nothing actually is purely left brain or right brain. We talk more about left mode dominant or right mode dominant processing. And the way a memory is supposed to work is that you have integrated networks across left and right. Okay. And what that does is that gives you your right brain, which is the body-based emotional experience, the sensory memories, that sort of thing, are connected to the left brain, like narrative, anchored in time, logical, linear, sort of thing. And so it's all wired together in a way that when one gets activated, the other, and it's balanced. So let me give you an example. Thanksgiving's coming up. If I asked you, what was Thanksgiving like as a kid? Or you ask me that, I'm going to go, okay, Thanksgiving as a kid. My left brain goes, I know what the word Thanksgiving means. And okay, when I was a kid, that's going back in time. All right, I remember. And then I start remembering my grandma's house, and I remember the sound of the leaves blowing across the yard. Okay, these are right brain memories. And now my mouth is watering because I'm remembering the smell of the turkey and dressing in her kitchen and all this. So they're linked up together. But here's what happens when we experience trauma. The part of the brain right here in the middle that links up left and right hemispheres, it's called the corpus callosum. The functionality of the corpus callosum goes down. So there's a disintegration, a disassociation of left and right hemispheres. So now when a memory gets activated on one side, it doesn't necessarily activate the corresponding memory on the opposite side. Here's what that means for trauma. A smell, a sight, a place, activates the right brain memory network. And so that activates all the body sensory memories, emotional memories, but it's not activating the left brain that would say, oh, you're remembering this from back then. And because the right brain has no sense of time, when it gets activated without the left brain corresponding network, it's not anchored in time. It feels like you're experiencing something right here, right now. It's reliving rather than remembering. Okay. And so that's the very basic, most basic understanding of a trauma trigger. So this right brain memory, body-based memory gets activated by, it could be an internal cue, a feeling I have on the inside, could be an external cue, something I see, something I hear, a place I'm going, something like that. And it activates this over here and not this over here. Okay. And so now I feel like I'm reliving rather than remembering. And so what we're trying to do, so what that does basically, this is a real fancy looking graphic. This is about as fancy as I get. It sends us way up above this window of tolerance into either dysregulated hyperarousal up here, fight or flight, I'm jumpy, stuck on, hypervigilant, flooded, or some of us go down into dysregulated hypoarousal, flat affect, lethargic, kind of numbed out, checked out, shut down, power off. Either way, when I am outside that window of tolerance, when I'm up in hyperarousal or down in hypoarousal, what's happening is my whole brain is not online. Okay, my whole brain's not online. I'm up in either sympathetic nervous system way turned on, or the parasympathetic, the brakes have been tapped. Okay. So what we're talking about here is affect regulation. I'm just going to pause the screen share for a minute and speak at you for a little bit. All of us, all the time, have an affective state going on. Affect, A-F-F-E-C-T, refers to what we're feeling in the body, and it's the constant backdrop of all of our experience, all of our processing, all of our interpreting of the data that's coming in. It all runs through the filter of our affect. So if I'm in an affective state of calm and peace, then as data comes in, that affects the way I interpret that data. If I'm already edgy, so if I've had a really good day and my wife comes in and she says, hey, I'm going to have to, this really happened last night. Hey, I'm going to have to work late tomorrow and I didn't realize it. You're going to need to go get MJ from preschool. Well, if I'm in a relaxed state, I'm like, oh, no problem. Sure, I can do that. I'll figure that out. If I'm already on edge, I'm like, well, man, let's see, how am I going to do? Same data, different processing, different response, and it's based on this affective state. So what that means is that in different affect states, we present different ways, we think different ways, we feel different ways. Every single one of us is actually made up of a collection of these different self states based on our affect. And they're all context dependent. So, I see Tammy's face, I hear her voice. I'm happy. I'm in a happy affect state. Okay. If I'm, dealing with an accidental HIPAA breach that happened this morning, that's a major crisis for mental health professionals. That was not in such a good affect state. But because I've done a lot of work and paid a lot of money for therapy and that sort of thing, even though I can present differently, they're enough the same person that they work together in a unified way. So that's why you can have your work hat on, or your dad hat on, or your mom hat on, or your wife hat on, or your friend hat on, or whatever, but you're still basically the same person. But trauma can cause us to have an affect state develop that is not really integrated with the others. And all of a sudden, when that affect state gets activated, all of a sudden now I'm acting in ways that are very different than who I normally am, right? I get triggered. I might suddenly act outside my own values, for example. Or I might act and say things that I don't really mean or believe when I'm grounded. Okay. So all of this is happening because of that disintegration of the memories in the brain and how that affects what's going on in the body, and whether our body is staying within that window of tolerance where everything is online, regulated, integrated, or it's thrown me into a state of disintegration, dysregulation, disassociation from all the rest of me, if that makes sense. Okay. So really and truly, when we get triggered, okay, because of trauma, we are not ourselves, or we are a part of ourselves that is dissociated from the rest of ourselves. And this is also, just so you know, this is also a lot often what's happening for the sex addict who is acting out. When that addictive cycle gets activated, they are in a self state that is disintegrated from the rest of who they are. That's why betrayed partners often ask me, I feel like I knew him. I feel like I knew her. How could he act that, he's active in the church and he does all these good things and he's a great dad. How could he go and do that? It could, I'm not going to say it's always this, but it could be that when that trigger happens in that addictive cycle, an affect and self state get activated that is really and truly dissociated from the rest of who he is. Okay. All right. So what I'm saying, to kind of like trying to make it real clear and plain, is regulation. If you're regulated in your body, that means your brain systems are integrated. That means you have a flexibility. Okay, I can put my work hat on. Oh, I can put my dad hat on. Oh, I can put my, neighbor hat on. That's good. I can shift among these different affects and self states in a way that it's adaptive, right? It's accomplishing what I needed to accomplish. But if I'm dysregulated, okay, now in my body, then there's a disintegration of the different systems in my brain. Okay, that's going to throw me into either rigidity. It's got to be this way. No, I only see it this way. Black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking, or impulsivity. So one way or the other, and I can't hold that place in the middle. That's bad. And I know we're not supposed to use words like bad, but I'm just making it real simple. What we want, what's good, is flexibility, adaptability, able to shift between these states. What is not helpful and unhealthy and sets us up for further injury, actually, is to be thrown into either a strict rigidity or a no holds barred, no boundaries impulsivity, which is what happens when there's disintegration of the mental systems, which is the result of the dysregulation of the body. Okay. So there are different systems in the brain that are actually getting literally sort of pulled, not literally pulled apart, but literally stop talking to each other when this happens. Okay, and here's where I really get kind of wonky, but I think it's really helpful, because when I've done this webinar before and I got a lot of feedback about this section. So bear with me, because even though it gets a little bit technical, you might see yourself, if you're someone who is struggling with trauma triggers, this might help you understand your own experience of what's going on. So I'm going to put this slide up. So there are 5 different cognitive subsystems in the brain that combine with our affect regulation system to produce the self state that we're in presently. So again, what that means is the way I'm showing up right now is the combination of the state of my body. So right now I'm a little more, got a little more intensity, a little more arousal. I'm talking about sexual arousal. I'm talking about like the level of energy in the body, because I'm focused on doing this webinar, right? So I'm a little heightened there. I'm focused. I'm mostly relaxed though at the same time. And that means I'm regulated, integrated, and all 5 of these systems, hopefully, are working together. Okay. If I get triggered, these 5 systems that are on this slide, and I'm going to walk through them here in a minute, they start to come apart. They just don't work together. And that affects our thinking. Okay, so this is how your thinking is affected when you get triggered. Okay, so the first cognitive subsystem is called the attentional subsystem. Okay, and when we're in a regulated state, we're able to move flexibly and adaptively between looking at basically zooming out, looking at the whole context of something, or zooming in, right, on one thing. So like right now, I'm pretty zoomed in on this webinar, right? But if I needed to, let's say I heard sirens going off or something outside, I could shift and I could broaden and expand and then go turn my attention there and zoom in over there. So the attentional system, think of it like the zoom lens in your mind. Can I zoom out and look at the big picture? And then can I at will zoom in and look at one particular thing? Well, when we're dysregulated, that leads to becoming stuck in one or the other, either zoomed out and I'm looking at the whole thing, you know, and a lot of like if you're a betrayed partner, for example, okay, sometimes betrayed partners, excuse me, sometimes betrayed partners get stuck in that contextual space and they're like, they can't look at this one thing. Maybe a therapist is trying to help them see, oh, they thought this was happening, but it wasn't. That they can't zoom in on that because in their trauma, all they can see is the whole thing, everything they found out, and they have difficulty zooming in on that one piece. That's because the attentional system is dissociated. It's impaired by the trauma, or they get stuck on this one piece and they can't see the whole context. And they're letting this one thing that they're zoomed in on affect their judgments and their thinking and their feelings in that moment because they can't zoom out and look at the big picture. So that's the attentional system. That's one way that trauma will affect the brain. Okay. The second subsystem, cognitive subsystem, is the perceptual system. Now, these build on each other. So the perceptual system is going to take the data gathered by the attentional system, and it's going to piece it together to construct our experience of the present. So again, it's going to take the data that was brought in from either the zoomed in or the zoomed out, and it's going to put it together. And when we're in a regulated state, we experience what's presently happening as sort of like our inner and outer worlds, they're all fitting together. It makes sense, in other words. But when we're dysregulated, our body experience is not integrated with the incoming external data, and it leads to these perceptions of our body, minds, in the world. Again, that's really wonky. Let me tell you what it means. It means my body is acting like I'm in a different context than I actually am. So for example, here's a really common one, okay? Let's say that a betrayed partner previously walked in on, and I'm using her here as the partner, her husband, and caught him looking at porn on his phone in the bedroom. Let's say that happened. So he's in good recovery. He's been sober, let's say 2 years, but she walks into the bedroom and he's on his phone and he puts his phone down and he's honestly doing it because, hey, she just walked in. I want to pay attention to her. But her seeing that, her body now reacts to a context that's not actually the one coming in. He's connected, he's present, he's being empathic, but her body's reacting like the old thing. That's the perceptual system in the brain, not linking together the internal experience with the external. Okay, that's another effect of a trauma trigger. Okay, now let's look at the third here. This is the representational cognitive subsystem. Okay, so this is about future and past. Okay, if you think about it, this sounds a little bit philosophical, but you can't touch the past. You can't actually see the future. Those are representations. So our memory of the past or our prediction or our anticipation of the future, those are representations that our mind comes up with. And in a regulated state, this subsystem in the brain is able to bring together things, representations from the past with what's happening in the present or anticipation of the future to construct like a flexible experience that takes into the whole everything of what we know. Okay. But when we're dysregulated, okay, we can't integrate the past and the present. And so it splits them off from each other. And I can't separate what happened in the past from what now, or I can't let what I know from the past impact what I know now. Let me give you an example, a personal one that has nothing to do with, sex or relationships or betrayal or anything like that. So several years ago, my grandfather's house burned down in the middle of the night. And I won't get into the whole story of it, but I had vicarious trauma from that. And it was this strange thing. They believed that his house burned down, I was told, because of a heating element in a heating pad that he had outside for the cat in the wintertime. And that caught fire and burned the house down. And when I learned that piece of information, I was pouring a cup of coffee for myself and I'm looking at the coffee pot, which has a heating element in it. Now, I know from my whole life and past and everything I know that the likelihood of my house burning down because of the heating element in the coffee pot is like less than 0.001%. I know rationally, cognitively, and because of my past experience that I should anticipate other things as being a bigger threat to burning my house. And there are other things in my house that are far more likely to cause a fire than a coffee pot. But for a period of about 3 or 4 years, I could not leave my house without unplugging my coffee pot. I would turn around after 20 minutes of driving and make sure that my coffee pot was unplugged. It was completely irrational, but it was because I couldn't piece together this present threat with everything I knew from the past and to anticipate a rational future. 45 minutes of EMDR, it was gone. But there for a while, that would happen and it would just totally dissociate my brain from everything else I knew. Okay, 2 more here on this slide. The memory subsystem is also connected. It's just another version of what I just said. So but now rather than it being about time and what I knew from the past or experienced in the past, now it's more about information, right? And about what I know. So now this memory gets fragmented and it's not incorporated into the whole. And this one bit of data is driving the whole thing. And then the last one is the reflective system. And the reflective system is where we're able to think about thinking, okay, where I'm able to actually self-reflect on what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling. But when I get dissociated, I actually I can't do that. I'm just being driven by old scripts, old schemas, old ways of doing things. And I don't have the self-awareness to go, wow, I'm actually reacting here to my wife like she's my mother, for example, or whatever. And that part of the brain that's able to have that reflection is like offline. So hopefully that's helpful in maybe if you experience trauma triggers, which I mean, I'm sorry if you do, but you're tuning into this for a reason. Maybe you see some of yourself in some of those, and what my hope is for you is you go like, oh wow, there's a real reason why. This isn't just I'm weak or I'm broken or there's something wrong with me. No, these are real impairments in the brain that are developed as a result of trauma, and I'm going to take all of that. I'm going to boil it down to 3 things. Okay. I share all that wonky stuff because, a lot of my regular followers like me, they tell me, I get the feedback. They're like, no, we want to hear all of that neurobiology or whatever. But then I want to bottom line it and make it just super clear. So I'm going to boil that down to 3 things that happen when our brains get dissociated, disintegrated, dysregulated. Number 1 is automaticity. Okay, we go into an automated state, right? So rather than actually being like flexible and presently responsive to what's happening, it's like autopilot,
some script gets activated and I am headed that direction automatically, like choice gets turned off. And I don't want to absolve anyone of responsibility because we're all responsible, but really the part of the brain that makes choices is offline and we're just going. So automaticity, I'm acting automatically. Number two, compartmentalization. Okay, so I am compartmentalizing this present experience, separated from maybe my values, maybe the whole of my history, maybe everything I know about you, this other person, maybe it's compartmentalized from other data that if I remembered that, I could get real nuanced or whatever. That's not happening. So automaticity, I'm acting automatically. Compartmentalization, I'm only taking in a piece of, we'll call it reality or all the data or whatever. And then number three is an altered state of consciousness. Okay. Now in an extreme, that would be like, DID, like another identity, but it doesn't have to be that extreme. It could just be my state of consciousness is altered. I am actually feeling depersonalization, which means like I don't feel myself, I'm not acting like myself, or derealization, which is like this place doesn't seem safe, this place doesn't seem real, to me, and that sets me off. So those are boiling it down, those are the three things that happen. I start acting automatically, I compartmentalize, and I'm in an altered state of consciousness. Okay, let me just pause right here for any questions so far.
We do have questions, and so I
Okay.
will, and you can see them if you want to click on the Q&A
Yeah.
at the bottom too. So it says,
Okay.
hi, if
Got
addict's behavior is a reflection of his trauma, please explain to me again the appropriate and smart level of empathy and boundaries for me that I need for safety, taking into account my limits. And with having a special needs child and financial dependency, can you verbalize what a healthy balance looks like and how to think about taking that into account for my betrayal trauma and his trauma? And she adds, hi, Jake, I'm a big fan, listen to you all the time. So
Okay.
that's awesome. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. So what comes up for me around this is the word dialectic, which is a big important word in mental health. Dialectics are two things that are hard to hold together, but we really need to hold them together. And this is a dialectic that I hear you struggling with. The dialectic between empathy and compassion for an addict's trauma and your need for boundaries and limits. And here's what I would say is just really try to hold both and walk that line as hard as it is, and don't fall off on either side. And maybe it would help to see that those maybe aren't as far apart as you might think. And here's what I mean. Having boundaries for your own safety and your own, and I'm not just talking about like physical or financial safety, even like emotionally, right? Are not just for your good, they're for his good also. Because if he's acting in ways that are causing you to need to have that boundary for safety, I'd be willing to bet, if I were a betting man, okay, that there's a thread that goes back to some of that trauma, right? He's feeling some threat. This is some maladaptive coping mechanism, whatever. And so when you set a boundary and you say, I'm not going to engage you when you're in this self state, you can use some of my wonky clinical terminology. I'm not going to engage you when you're in an altered state of consciousness because you're triggered. That's not just for your good, that's for his. Okay. And you can even vocalize, I understand that you've got a lot of trauma too. And I appreciate that you're working on that, if he in fact is. And because I care about you and I care about me and our relationship, I'm not going to participate in this kind of, dialogue or fighting or whatever it is. And so holding both, I think it can be hard, but it's also, there's a sweet spot there where maybe they don't feel so oppose those two ends of empathy and boundaries. Because I think actually having boundaries is one of the kindest things you can do in any relationship. Clarity about boundaries. Yeah.
I 100% agree. Okay, so the next question is, when I find out that my husband is acting out and I get a hyper arousal state, could that trigger a feeling of wanting to reconnect physically? Even if I don't want to be physical, my body reacts like that.
Yeah, it absolutely could. That is not uncommon. That is not an uncommon response at all. So there's a lot of things, if we were doing therapy together, I'd really want to dig in and explore that and know, is this a reaction based on fear? Like if he's acting out, if you were to be physical with him, maybe it would keep him from doing that. Is there that kind of thinking? Is it awakening something in you that needs its own processing that might be connected to an old trauma or something like that? I don't know, but what I do want to tell you is that's common. You are not alone. Some betrayed partners, when they find out about acting out, they shut down sexually. Some, it is a common reaction to the discovery of sexual betrayal to become hypersexual. Both are normal. I don't want to speculate what's going on in you without, more data. That's probably not helpful, but I do want to normalize that for you for sure.
Okay, the next question is brutal honesty here. As part of my grief, my mind wants to be able to stay with an active addict. My bandwidth is too low and I need to free up and have more reserves. Do you agree that with excellent self-care and focus on me only, with a lot of help and training, that I can pull this off? My nervous system isn't cooperating with what my mind wants.
I feel the struggle in
Yeah.
how you wrote that. It's
Mhm.
that's powerful. And I do believe that yes, you can, with support and self-care and help and training, you can pull that off. You can find a way to, if I'm understanding you right, so your mind wants to stay, but you can't do it. Here's what I believe. Whether you're saying, can I stay with an active addict, or whether you're saying, can I separate and do self-care, the answer is yes. You can do whatever you set your mind to with enough support and training and that sort of thing. I do want to say this though, and maybe you can pop back in later and clarify this. If you're staying with an active addict, I would want to ask some questions about what that looks like in a way that is helpful for both you and the addict who's active in addiction. So I'm a fan of Rob Weiss and Prodependency. I would never shame anyone for wanting to stay with someone who's struggling with an addiction. I absolutely believe that's a compassionate thing to do. But what it looks like to stay with them
Mhm.
is a really important question. And
Mhm.
if staying with them is taxing you and depleting you to the point that you're not then going to be able to show up in the supportive way that they might need, that's actually not helping either of you. And so I would be asking questions about, how do I balance self-care and staying with someone active in addiction while, if that's my choice, while showing up in a way that is helpful to that person as well. I hope that makes sense.
It does. And this person has shared there's, financial dependency and special needs child, and codependence, just so everybody's clear, is not about staying at all costs. It is,
No.
You love someone who's broken, you care about someone, but there are situations, whether it's financial or, child, whatever, there's a lot of logistics that sometimes preclude someone from leaving a relationship, as easily as someone else might be able to do so. But I love that you're asking about the self-care, and I think what Jake said a little while ago about, honoring your healthy boundaries, can be the most caring thing you can do, for an addict as well. So your healthy boundaries about self-care, clearly articulated to the addict, I think that is a meaningful thing. And sometimes it does feel paradoxical, and to wrap our head around how do we, navigate this, because it feels like we're walking on a little tiny balance beam, and sometimes we are, but other times I think just in going, making sure that I'm taking care of me. We talk all the time. You can't, on the planes they say put your oxygen mask on first. You can't do anything for anybody else if your bandwidth, as you have said, is really low. So how do you get support to increase your bandwidth, for a special needs child, for for an active addict, all of those things, but I think the self-care has to be a priority, because
Yeah.
you depleted, is not helpful for anybody.
That's right. And here I'll plug many of the groups that are available at sexandrelationshipshealing.com, because this is where community is so critical. If I have a group of people who have a common experience, similar enough experience, who I can go to, and they can sort of act as counsel to me and help me. I get a consult, from these folks. Am I being reasonable here? Is this boundary, does this sound helpful? Am I giving too much of myself? And let other people see you, because we all have blind spots. And so finding those communities of trusted, healthy support to act as that consultation group as you try to navigate these really murky, complex relational situations is just really critical.
And it, the posse and circle the wagon. So I must be on a Western theme right now, but saying no to other obligations. Do you need to pull in a little bit, so that, holidays are coming up, what do we need to do, across everything to make sure we're taking care of ourselves? And it can be, no, I'm not going to that event, or no, I'm not hosting Thanksgiving, whatever it is, and learning to be okay with saying no is, that's a whole nother topic and webinar, but
Yeah, that's
taking
right.
care of you, is critical for everyone. So, okay, next question. First D-Day was 6 years ago, found his specific barely legal arousal template on his laptop. With every relapse, it is somewhat this template. However, 5 years later, I discovered the same arousal photos and dating sites that I saw on his first D-Day. It took me emotionally back 5 years ago. With all the therapy and EMDR, why would that have dysregulated me to full-on PTSD mentally and physically? He started with Darvo and blamed me for my reaction to it, still struggling with what he prefers. So what are your
Ooh,
thoughts?
that's really hard. That is so hard. Well, let me start with, it sounds like I'm making up that you're sort of having a judgment toward yourself that, oh, because I had all this therapy, I did all this EMDR, after the first discovery, I shouldn't have reacted that way to that discovery 5 years later. The discovery 5 years later is traumatic also, and so you might have done great work on the first discovery and done the EMDR, done the therapy, all of this stuff. Well, then it's like, that would be like saying, 5 years ago I have a car accident and I have to do, all this physical therapy afterwards. I get back to healing, I'm in another car accident and I'm injured again, I'm going to have to do physical therapy, and I go, oh, but I should have, why should I have to do this physical therapy now? I already did it years ago. Well, you've had another car accident, you've had another injury. And so this is not a weakness or a character defect on your part that you've been re-injured, that you've been traumatized again after another discovery. I hate that for you, but unfortunately, like the EMDR from before isn't necessarily going to cover a future trauma, you know. Now it also means, like, if I take my car wreck analogy, hopefully y'all can't hear my dog barking at the mailman out there or something.
It's all good.
Sorry. There's nothing I can do about it. He's
No,
completely
yeah.
uncontrollable.
Yeah.
But so you know, maybe the second round after the second car accident, because I have done physical therapy before, well, I already know how it goes. So maybe I can jump into it faster. Oh, I remember that exercise. Oh, I remember this was helpful, and it may come into play and speed up or help my recovery the second go around. That could be true. But you know, this is a new trauma. I guess that's what I'm saying. And you know, still struggling with what he prefers. Sure. And what I would say to you is, I don't think it's unreasonable to say you might, like, it's okay to struggle with that. It's that sounds like an appropriate thing to struggle with. And you get to decide and navigate, you know, is that a struggle you can tolerate and live with and stay in relationship or not? You know, you get to kind of wade through that. But I don't know. You didn't use the word should, but I'm making up that you might be shoulding on yourself a little bit. Like, I shouldn't struggle with this anymore. I shouldn't struggle. And that's, don't should on yourself. That's not helpful. You know, it sounds like something that would be a struggle. It sounds reasonable to me. Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing with it's like, unfortunately, you know, work on past trauma doesn't, like, you know, negate all, you know,
Yeah.
future trauma. So, you know,
Yeah.
the analogy with the car accident and having another, you know, real, you know, hurt and pain and everything else is absolutely. But I also was thinking too, like, okay, I've done the physical therapy, so like, you know, what can be helpful for you. And
Yeah.
you know, I'm sorry that he is still stuck in, you know, continuing that cycle. To me, you know, you taking care of you, but also, you know, the level of of his work on his program is not sufficient if he's, you know, continuing
That's right.
to do these, you know, these issues. So separately, you know, you getting support, you know, doing more EMDR, doing the things that you need to do for you, and him working on himself, because whatever, you know, he's doing isn't enough, but it's also not your fault. Nothing you did or didn't do is, you know, causing him to do that. That's on him. So,
Yeah.
okay, next question. How do we differentiate between a dysregulated self state and our gut instinct? Sometimes it's
Mm.
hard to find if I'm triggered and paranoid or I'm sensing something. That's a great question.
That is a great question. I love that question. And I think, you know, one of my goals when I'm working with folks who've been betrayed is I want them to get back to a place where they can trust their gut. And this isn't a fun answer that I'm going to give, but I think it's the best answer there is. I think it takes time and awareness, and it's like doing a self-study. And again, having that community that you're able to share with and really open up with them and get their input. And let me say this about that. A healthy community isn't just going to be a bunch of sycophants or a bunch of yes men, right? Or a bunch of people who just get riled up with you. That's not, you know, that's not helpful. Where you come in and you're triggered and they all just come up to your level and agree with you on everything. You want people who are able to be empathic and kind of join you in what you're feeling and feel with you. That's empathy, to feel with, right? But you also want them to be able to have a little bit of space and go, well, let's be curious about this. Let's, you know, and ask you good questions and slow you down. And I think if you can do that over time, here's what you'll figure out. You'll figure out that when it's your gut instinct, you're going to feel your whole brain still online. You're going to feel
feet on the ground. You're going to still feel grounded versus when it's a dissociated self state, you're being carried away. Okay. So are you still fully in control of yourself? Is the trigger driving the bus, or are you? Okay. Thank you, Tammy.
Yeah, yeah. I was like, I want to see more of you. So yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So, yeah, is the trigger driving the bus? If so, dissociated self state. Are you still fully in control? That's more likely your gut.
yeah, I love that. And I just said to somebody yesterday, it's not paranoia if it's real, you know.
That's right.
So it's really hard to figure that out. And we were having a discussion about it. So just like you're talking about, it's like getting validation of like, here's the circumstances, you know. So it does take time, and I feel for partners because they have been gaslit for so long that it's hard to, you know, oh no, your background isn't blue. No, what are you thinking? You know, like like all of
Yeah.
that. So it is hard to go,
Yeah.
no, my background is blue. So okay. My spouse is making strong strides in his recovery. Yay. 9 months sober. I have some idea of his acting out and hints of some very disturbing behaviors. My biggest fear is that I will be unable to emotionally regulate and then thrive going forward. Will my brain ever be able to normalize so the relationship could progress and thrive?
Yeah.
I think the answer is yes. Optimism and hope is one of my
Mhm.
values that I always
Me too.
bring
Yeah.
to clinical care. So, I mean, yes, I think that it's possible. I'm kind of making up from this question. It sounds like 9 months sober. And when you say you have some ideas of his acting out and some hints, it sounds to me like you haven't yet had a formal full therapeutic exposure.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Yeah.
And that's something that you want to do with someone. I mean, we do these every day
Qualified
almost. Yeah,
professionals. Yes.
qualified
Yeah.
professional, get help. It's a very sensitive process that sounds awful. And I'm not going to lie, it's not pleasant, but it can be very healing if done well. And so find someone who's going to put in the work with you to prepare for it, put in the work with him to prepare for it, to make sure it's thorough and complete and can walk you guys through it. We do those. And if we're not the right person, we don't mind connecting you with other providers, helping you find someone local in state. So if you need help with that, feel free to reach out.
Yes.
To me.
And I make
others.
referrals for that too all the time. So,
Yeah.
but you each want your qualified professional that's trained for this. So, you know, when Jake is talking about, I do these all the time, that's meaningful. When it's a generalist therapist that it doesn't have the
No.
experience, it doesn't go well, you know.
Yeah.
So you really, you know, this is, you know, I use all the time, you know, you like, this is like, you want the cancer specialist, you don't want your
Right.
general practitioner. You want
Exactly.
the right people. So but that
Exactly.
process, you know, is to set a solid foundation for moving forward. And so you're here, you're strong, you're resilient, you know. Yes, and you already know it's bad, you know that. So you know, but you getting support, you know, him doing the work, you know, you guys, you know, eyes wide open, you know, can move forward in a different way. It's not going to be all gumdrops and lollipops, but
Mm-mm.
you know, but it'll be an honest, real relationship.
Yeah. Well, one thing I'll add to that is right
Mhm.
now, while you don't have it, not only do you have like the trauma of what you've discovered and what you do know, you've got this continuous fear of what you don't know. And that will eat at you.
Yes.
That will really eat at you and take up a lot of space and bandwidth and burn up a lot of energy over time. And it will get worse and worse over time. And so better to know what you're dealing with and fear what you don't know
Yes.
you might be dealing with.
Yeah. And, you know, and I think for partners it's challenging, but part of the process is, you know, are there some things that you, if you absolutely heard this, that it would, you know, be a deal breaker, and think carefully about that, because if that is, you know, you know, like, well, two things. If that's actually something that, you know, the addict did, you know, and they figure out that that's a deal breaker, sometimes that they lie, which is horrible. We always say don't lie on your formal therapeutic disclosure. But if you're really, like if it's one of those, you go with proper support, I can navigate even that horrific whatever it is, then the ability to be transparent and move forward, is really a meaningful shift. So
Yes.
okay, next question. My husband and I are new to recovery. He appears very committed and proactive. I'm still in a state of dysregulation. Of course you are. He knew all the time he was acting out. You didn't. So, what
Mhm.
does a reasonable safety plan look like?
Oh, let's see. So it's gonna be different with for different folks. I would ask you questions about what's your financial situation, what's your work situation, what kind of resources do you have access to? Because I think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So that's where it's like physical safety and needs first, and then all the way up to those more relational intimacy and self-actualization, all that kind of stuff. And we got to start with, are you physically safe? Do you have the resources you need? Is because for some partners, things like food and shelter, these are legitimate concerns that they're facing with safety. If we're moving up and it's more about relational safety, intimacy, emotional vulnerability, that kind of thing, that's where you know things like an in-house separation, or I only want to talk to you about these things in the presence of a professional, right? When we're in a therapy session or things like that, right? So I'd have a lot of questions for you about your particular situation and your needs. Now I'm going to hone in though on that you're still in a state of dysregulation. But I know we're coming up on that hour mark, and
Hmm.
we're going to have to do a part 2 of this, Tammy, because I've
Yes,
got a
we
whole
are.
lot
Thank you. I
more
was going
to
to
do.
beg you for it online. So, yeah.
But let me just do this with you, and everyone can do this. I want to lead you in a real quick exercise to help you return to a state of regulation in your body, like literally get back into regulation. So you can all do this with me right now. So be sitting, put both your feet on the floor. If you want to be barefoot, you can. If you're wearing like boots with lots of lace ups, don't take the time to take them off, because I'm going to do this pretty quickly. But I want you to actually sort of like rock to the side, back, left and right. And I want you to notice the points of your hip bones, okay, where they come through your bottom there. All right. I'm sorry to get a little bit graphic. So just feel that. Okay, now sit still and notice those 2 points of your hip bones. Now on the top side, kind of it's going to be near the waist. Feel the top 2 points of your hip bones. Okay, so you got 4 points there. Now sit up, and in your mind, I want you to connect those 4 points, and it's going to make a square kind of slicing through your core there. So from left to right on the bottom, left to right on the top, sort of imagine a line there, and then top to bottom on the left, top to bottom on the right. And now you've got those 4 points. There are 3 sets of muscles that intersect those 4 points, that plane, okay? I want you to relax them all. Now, this is almost, and excuse me, this gets a little bit graphic, but this is good science, okay? It's kind of like your bathroom muscles. Imagine you were going to the bathroom and then you kind of stopped midway, then you're going to start going again. Those are the muscles I'm asking you to relax. So it's almost going to feel like you're pushing down and out against your pelvic floor. And once you relax them, see if you can relax them even more. And even more. And while you're holding those muscles in that relaxed position, let's take a few deep breaths in and out. And as you exhale, keep making sure they're relaxed, and in and out. And one more time, in and
out. And as I talk, just continue to be mindful of keeping those muscles relaxed. Try to relax the other muscles in your body, your back, your legs. Continue breathing rhythmically. Now, here's what's happening there. Your vagus nerve starts down there and runs straight up into your brain. Those muscles, when they squeeze the vagus nerve, it drives you upward into hyperarousal. It's like the gas pedal of the sympathetic nervous system. Humans are the only creature that can manually turn that off by relaxing these muscles. And if you hold these muscles in that open, relaxed position and you do some deep breaths for about a minute, it manually shifts you into a parasympathetic dominant state. In other words, the brakes come on instead of the gas pedal. And that can manually shift your body downward into regulation if you've been up in hyperarousal. And I tell my clients, and I'm using hyperbole here, but I say, set an alarm on your phone to remind yourself to do that every 2.5 minutes. I'm kidding. Don't actually do it every 2.5 minutes. But if you can, throughout the day, do that and keep bringing your body back down into regulation, out of that hyper aroused state, it really will have an effect on your whole nervous system. Okay? Because you're just taking pressure off that vagus nerve. You're shifting into parasympathetic dominant state rather than sympathetic. In other words, coming down out of hypervigilance. Do that. That's a simple thing to do. Relax those muscles. Take a deep breath. So my wife and I are constantly saying to each other, like, if we're really uptight, we'll be like, relax your rear, you know. So that's one tool that can help shift your body back into regulation.
Thank you so much. I'm going to reach out to you. We are going to schedule another one of these at a convenient time. So thanks for all the great questions, everybody. Do come back. There's lots more. I know that there were more slides that we didn't get to. So, but thank you for the great questions too. So
yes, that was fun. Thank you,
all
Tammy.
right.
Thank you, everyone.
Great to see you. Bye.
Bye-bye.